the shiur is on achilat agalim, basically whether it's kosher for us to eat veal or not. So what is veal? Veal is basically it's meat that's very tender, it's soft, it's not fatty, it's light colored, and for us to be able to reach this, to get this type of meat, the calves are raised in a certain way. And we're going to go through a lot of the issues with the way they raise the calves and whether this makes achilat agalim mutar or asur. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what they're fed. From the time they're born, these calves aren't fed milk, their mother's milk, but rather they're fed hot milk mixed in with powdered animal fats, right? And this hot milk is derech bishul, right? So they're mixed in derech bishul, and therefore it's basar b'chalav d'oraita. So the Mishnah says, so the first source, if you go to the first source, Mishnah Mesachet Shumah Daf Lamed Amud Bet, says Rabbi Chinya ben Antiganus Omer Kosher she'anka min hatrefa pisulah me'al gabei mizbeach. Right, so a kosher animal that nurses from a taref is pasul to be brought onto the mizbeach, and the Gemara explains in the next source. If you look at the end of the second line, Kegon she'anikach chalav roteach mishachari l'shachari to'il ve'chula la'amod alei me'ed le'ed. That since it can survive the whole day on this mixture, right, and that it can be seen that its entire growth is derived from this mixture, and since its entire growth is derived from this mixture, so then it's isur achilat be'ema shenitafah midvarim asurim, right? So since its growth can be derived from this entire mixture, that's taref, then the animal itself should also be taref.
בהלכה. זה הרבה פעמים אני נשאל בשאלה הזאת. המושג הוא זה וזה גורם, כשלמשל, דוגמה יפה ניתן לכם. אדם יש לו פרה, והפרה הזאת אכלה חמץ. האם החלב שלה מותר לשתות בפסח או אסור? אז לפי הגמרות שאנחנו קוראים פה מותר, מאחר והחלב לא נוצר רק מהחמץ. החלב נוצר משתי פעולות. מה עם שתי הפעולות? גם הפרה עצמה יצרה את זה, וגם החמץ. זה וזה גורם, זה מותר. הבנתי? יהיה לכם כלל. כאן אנחנו דנים אותו דבר עכשיו בשאלה הזאת. יפה מאוד שאתה מדבר על הנושא.
יש לו את הגמרא פה. זה וזה גורם. הוא יגיע.
לא, אני רק רוצה להגיד לכם שכל תלוי בסוגיות של זה וזה גורם, איך מתייחסים לזה. תמשיך.
So those for the Sfardim who rely on the Rambam, there's something to rely on. And if you look at the end of the Rambam, the third source, he says, "Vein halachak Rabbi Elazar v'lo Rabbi Chinya ben Antiganus." So he doesn't agree with the Gemara and the Mishnah that seems to say that it's asur for us to eat this veal. So in the fourth source, if you look at the Tosfot says, "She'ankach alav roteach vehu adin bekarshini avodat kochavim im achla kol yemei sheikar gidilta mehen shu asur ulufum riyata afilu lehediot." So he says that he agrees that since its whole growth is derived from this taref, it should itself be also taref. But he says not only is it pasul ma'al gabei mizbeach, it's also pasul for us for regular use. And the Rama adds on, and he says be'ema shnitpatma b'dvarim asurim muteret, aval im lo nitpatma kol yemei rak b'dvarim asurim asura. So the Rama also says that since it only eats dvarim asurim all day, every day, it also is asur. So the Shach comes and says that the Rama took our concept a little too far. If you look at the second page, probably the fourth line up from the end of the Shach, at the end of the line he goes on and says, "Alma de lehedyo lo asur ela shenitgadla mikarshine avodat kochavim de asira bahana'a aval mizbeach asur afilu de lehav asure hana'a." So for the mizbeach, for bringing these calves as a korban on the mizbeach, according to everyone is asur, but for it to be asur for our use for hedyot, it has to be asur ba'ana. So only if it's asur ba'ana is it then asur for us to eat. So if you look at the Shulchan Aruch says that in the source 7, lo tevashal gedi b'chalev imo. Gimel pamim echad li'asur bishul v'echad li'asur achila v'echad li'asur hana'a ve'hotzi achila b'lashon bishul lomar she'eno asur min haTorah ela bishul aval midrabanan asur b'chol inyan. And this is the main point over here. Kol basar b'chalav she'eno asur min haTorah mutar b'hana'a. So only if it's asur min doraita is it then asur b'hana'a. right? And so we said, but the mixture that they're given is a sur d'oraita, right? Because it's hot milk, it's derech bishul. So the OU basically came and tried to fix this issue, and what they did is they made this mixture as basar b'chalav midrabanan and not midoraita. I'm not sure how they did it. Whatever it is, they changed the recipe of this mixture. So now according to the Tosfot, it's no longer asur for hedyot because now it's mutar ba'ana. It's not asur ba'ana because it's only chalav basar midrabanan, not midoraita. But according to the Ramah, we still have an issue. According to those who follow the Ramah, there's still a problem with eating veal because the Ramah says that it's asur because it eats b'dvarim asurim. Because since it eats dvarim asurim, only dvarim asurim, that is the reason why it's asur, and it stays and it remains asur. So it seems that according to the Tosfot, according to the Rambam, that it's kasher, and only those who follow the Ramah have this issue of eating veal, right? So one possible explanation we tried to give maybe to the Ramah or to those who don't eat veal is exactly what Rabbi Ben-Chaim said. Is this concept of v'zeh gorem mutar, right? Is that when we have two things that two factors, meaning one a permitted factor and an asur factor that come together, their outcome should be permitted, right? So this is a possible answer that we give to say that maybe veal is kasher, right? But then we see also that it's hard to say this because if you look at the Pri Megadim, right, it says. I didn't actually bring it down, but I'm just going to say that the Pri Megadim says the Pri Megadim is posek that zev gorem is mutar, but not lechatchila, only b'diavad, and lechatchila it's asur. So even if you want to give that as an answer, we still have an issue because lechatchila you can't do that. It's only b'diavad. And I actually spoke to Rav Alkin about this, and Rav Alkin said that Rav Alkin tried to give an answer himself to this issue of this mixture, and something he said was maybe that you can compare it to gelatin. And like gelatin, most Sephardi poskim and some Ashkenazi poskim say that gelatin is okay. Why? Because gelatin is bones of isur that are crushed into powder, right? So nafka meno shema isur. It's completely different entity now. It's no longer bones of isur. It's now this powder, and it should no longer be asur for us to eat. So maybe Rabbi Alkin would say maybe we can apply that concept here to this mixture where the animal fats are powdered. So nafkami mena shemi isur, and therefore it's its own entity now. It shouldn't be considered asur anymore. So that was something Rabbi Alkin said maybe we can use to say it's kasher. So we've seen that unless you hold according to the Ramah, it doesn't. Our first issue of eating taref, that this animal eats taref all day, it doesn't seem to be such a problem. So, but the truth is there's other issues also with the upbringing of these calves. We're going to go through another two. The next issue is bidikat trefot, and let's look at Igrot Mosheh, right? This is what Rav Mosheh says, and this is source 9. ובדבר העגלים שנתחדש זה לא כבר שמפטמין אותם כל עגל במקום מיוחד לבד צר מאוד.
להבין והנקודה חשובה, יש שמאכילים ויש שאוכלת, יש שמפטמים. יש שאנחנו מאכילים אותם מאכלים אסורים. זה מפטמים. ויש שאכל הולכת בשדה ואוכלת, או שמים לה אוכל והיא אוכלת אותו. כן.
שאין להם מקום אף לילך איזה פסועות. So they're brought up in such a way that they're caged and they're not even given much room to move around. They're not given what regular calves are used to eating, and they're not given their mother's milk, but instead they're given this mixture. That the calves don't even like it.
שהבהמה צריכים לתת לדבר שהיא שמחה בו. נעלה לה, ניתן לה שמחה שהיא אוכלת.
So he goes on and says that they also become sick from this. And many shoftim muvakim say that these animals are so sick, they're so malnourished that only 15 out of 100 usually come out kasher. והכל מודיעין שרובן טרפות היפוך מחזקת בהמות שהן הקשרות. And our chazaka that most animals are kasher doesn't really apply here. As you can see, only 15 out of 100 really come out kasher. ומשמע שהוא רק מטרפות הראייה שרואים זה השוחטים בדין בדיקת הראייה. And they see this only by checking the lungs. After you shech the animal, you have to check the lungs to see if everything is good or not, right? To make sure it's kosher. And from only checking the lungs do they see that 15 out of 100 come out kosher. What if they check all the other parts of the animal that they don't normally check? If they check all the other parts of the animal, it's possible that even less than 15 out of 100 are going to come out kosher. אבל אפשר ייקח עוד טרפות בבני מעיים שפשוט שצריך לנו לבדוקם שמסתבר שיש לחוש לזה מאוד. So he says there's a big chashash that the other parts of these calves that are being treated this way are going to be taref.
תסביר את הדברים. מה שאנחנו בודקים זה רק את הריאה. אבל אם אתם רואים סימנים שהבהמות האלה מאוד חולות, צריכים לבדוק עוד דברים. אולי שם נהיה איזה נקל. הבנתם? אנחנו סומכים שהבהמות אין להם טרפות. לפי הכלל, תגידו את הכלל, הולכים אחר הרוב, שהבהמות הן כשרות. אבל כשאתה רואה שבריאות יש כל כך הרבה טרפות, אז בטח יש להם יכול להיות דברים שאתה לא בודק. זה מה שהוא אומר, שצריכים לבדוק את המעיים. ולמה אנחנו סומכים? מהדין מדאורייתא לא צריך לבדוק. למה? הולכים אחר הרוב, רואים בהמות כשרות. מדאורייתא אין צורך, זה מדרבנן. נמשיך.
Right, so according to Rabbi Ben-Chaim explained exactly. Rabbi Ben-Chaim explained exactly what Moshe said, that if you check the Ben-Chaim, there's probably a lot of other issues with the animal. So, right, then he goes on to say, "Shenachem eru haya la'asor me'lasot zeh u'ba'alei nefesh ein lu le'echol klal ma'agalim ke'elu af im yivdeku gam b'nei me'ayim." So
הוא אומר שבגלל שעושים להם ייסורים ובגלל הכשרות כדאי לא לאכול את הדברים.
Exactly. That's exactly what Moshe says here. But a lot of the OU shoftim.
הגלים זה בית יוסף, כן.
So a lot of the OU Shafatim say that Rav Moshe Netziut is no longer correct and doesn't really apply nowadays. And Rav Elkin explained that these calves are being treated with subtherapeutic antibiotics to prevent these treifot in the Bnei Me'ayin. Right. So the OU Shafatim say that the Mitzvah of Moshe doesn't really apply anymore, and this issue B'dikat treifot really kind of goes out the window. It's not such a problem anymore.
But there's still balakayim.
So that's the third issue that we're going to get to with the treatment of the upbringing of these animals is the tsar balakayim. And if you look at source 10, the Shulchan Aruch explains that tsar balakayim is a big deal, right? Because these animals are the way they're being treated. They're being kept in cages. They're not allowed to go roam around and get muscle. Because the whole point is that they're not fatty. They don't have any muscle. The meat's very tender and light. And tsar balakayim is a big problem. So the Shulchan Aruch says tsar balakayim is a big problem. The Ramah in source 11 explains mishum tsar balakayim dahavi deoraita. That tsar balakayim is such a problem that it's in fact deoraita. So why is the Ramah coming and telling us deoraita? What's the nafka mina between deoraita and derabanan in this case? And if tsar balakayim was derabanan, then really eating veal for us wouldn't be such an issue. Why? Because we'd have the goyim be the farmers for us. The goyim would be the ones who would do all this, and therefore we would be able to eat veal as long as we aren't the ones who are doing tsar balakayim. But since the Ramah comes and tells us that it's deoraita, that tsar balakayim is deoraita, that we can't use that as a solution, and we can't just have the goyim do the tsar balakayim because that affects us as well. So we still have this issue of tsar balakayim. So the Trumat Hadeshin comes and tries to give a tshuva and says that tsar balakayim is a big deal, but the only time that tsar balakayim is not so applicable is if it's for hanat b'nei adam. If you're doing something for hanat b'nei adam, that tsar balakayim doesn't really apply, right? And if you look at source 12, the second paragraph, he brings down a couple examples. Gam lachtoch lashon ha'ov kedei sheyidaber ve'oznaim v'zanav mikelev kedei liputo nir'in adarim de'ein asur mishum tsar balakayim im hu oseh letzorchav u'litash mishav. So there's no isur tsar balakayim if he's going to use it, if it's for his own use. De'lo nivreu kol habriot rak leshamesh et ha'adam. Right, so because these animals are put on earth for us, right? They're put on earth for us to use. So it's true you can't go ahead and torture them. But if it's for your use, if it's for hanat b'nei adam, then tsar balakayim doesn't really apply. It's kind of like the case. It's kind of like what Rabbi Ben-Chaim said. If you want to chef the chicken and you need to pluck a couple feathers from the from the neck, it's true that it hurts the chicken. It's Tzar Ba'al Chaim. You can't really pluck the chickens from the neck for no reason. But if you're doing it for shechita, if you're doing it to eat the animal, so then it's allowed. So according to Trumat Hadeshen, Tzar Ba'al Chaim really should not apply to our case over here of veal, because we're doing for Hanat B'nei Adam. We're doing it so we can get tender meat and whatnot, and it should be fine. And we see that this is really halacha l'maseh, where the Ramah comes in source 13, comes in and says, Kol davar tzarich lirfuah o l'shar dvarim, leit bei mishum isur tzar ba'al chaim. ולכן מותר למרוד נוצות מעוזות חיות ולקה למחש משום צער בעלי חיים ומכל מקום העולם נמנעים דהווה אכזריות. So Ramah says also that if it's for medicine or if it's for other uses, it's allowed. And the only reason why people shy away from it is because it's like a merciless thing, you know. It's not something nice to do. But if it's for Hanat B'nei Adam, it's for your own use, so then Tzar Ba'al Chaim shouldn't really apply, and it should be fine. So the Rav Mosheh and the Igro Mosheh comes and basically tries to throw this all out the window and says that you can't really apply that to our case here. Why? V'hine, so in source 14 he says, V'hine le'elu she'osim zeh ika v'dai yisur t'tzar ba'al chaim da'af she'hutar le'tzorech adam hu keshe'ika tzorech. So he's saying even though it's understood that if it's for tzorech adam, there has to really be a tzorech, like a real reason for why you're doing it. Not just because you have like a certain person out there that wants this meat to be so tender and so soft. If you want tender and soft meat, go buy tender and soft meat. Why do you have to torture this animal just to achieve this tender, soft meat, right? And he goes on and says, Al kol panim chazinan shelo kol devar rish'ai ha'adam la'asot be'emot shematzar otam af shehu la'arviach mizeh ela devar shu hana'at adam mamash, that it has to be real hana'at adam כשחיטת הבהמות לאכילה ולעבוד בהם וקדומה. אבל לא בדבר שהוא רק לרמות ולעטות את האנשי שיאכילו, בדבר שגם לאנשי אינו כלום ורק לרמות לאנשי שמזה שיראה מראה הבשר שהוא לבן ולא במראה אדום. כיצד שירתאו מזה שהוא בשר טוב יותר לבריות ולענענה וישלמו בשביל זה יותר. So what Moshe is saying is that what's the real reason they're selling veal? It's not for Hanat B'nei Adam. It's just because the storekeepers want to trick they want to trick all the buyers. What do you mean? They're trying to sell them on the fact that it's tender, it's soft, it's healthier, it's whiter. They want to sell it for more money. They want to make more money, and this isn't a real valid reason to say Tzar Ba'al Chaim doesn't apply here because of Hanat B'nei Adam. If you really want tender soft meat, so go buy tender soft meat. There's no reason to eat veal for this. Right, so he's saying that this whole concept of Hanat B'nei Adam doesn't apply for Tzar Ba'al Chaim is not applicable to our case. So that's what Rav Moshe said, and I believe that's something that Rav Ben-Chaim said before himself. But after speaking to Rabbi Alkin, many and Rav Shachter also. Actually, Rav Shachter said that the OU told him nowadays that there is no Tzar Ba'al Chaim in veal production, because obviously according to the OU it's Kosher. And Rav Elkin also explained that nowadays actually keeping the calves in cages and not letting them roam around in order for them not to grow muscle is actually illegal, and no veal production does that nowadays anymore. So how do they get veal? By avoiding that, but basically what they do is they shach them young. Calves are born after a few weeks. They're allowed to graze, roam around, and whatnot. After there's no real Tzar Ba'al Chaim, and the way they get veal is that they shach them young before they're able to gain muscle and before they become fatty and they grow. They shach them at a young age, so the meat stays tender, it stays soft, and it stays as a light color, what veal is supposed to be. So it seems that Tzar Ba'al Chaim, nowadays there really is no Tzar Ba'al Chaim anymore, and after going through most of these sources, it would seem, unless you hold according to the Ramah, which is, I believe, what Rav Shachter does, and that's the reason why Rav Shachter doesn't eat veal, unless you hold according to the Ramah, it seems that veal is Kosher and there really is no problem eating it.
אלקין אמר שהיום בימינו אין צער בעלי חיים לא תמצאים את העגלים זה לא עגלים ממש, רק אם שוחטים עגלים כמה שבועות. אז
אבל האמת היא, עושים אותם. בדרך
לא,
כלל,
שזה לא
משתמע.
הוא אמר שהיום אסור בהרבה מדינות, זה החוק, אסור להכניס אותם
שיעור נפלא זה היה, יפה מאוד, אתה עזרת לו.